The bottom of the world's oceans is a silent, starlit necropolis of high tensile steel, held in an eternal, crushing grip far beyond the reach of human sunlight. Across the vast blue expanse of the planet, hundreds of warships lie entombed in the silt, but none carry the weight, the majesty, or the profound tragedy of the great steel leviathans, the battleships. These vessels were the ultimate physical manifestations of industrial empire, floating fortresses that concentrated the entire industrial capability, scientific genius, and military hubris of nation-states into thousands of tons of Krupp, Harvey, and cement-hardened armor. Today, while some lie in shallow turquoise waters accessible to technical divers, others rest in the pitch-black abyssal plains 3 miles down, resting upon extinct undersea volcanoes, or half-buried in the mud of remote island lagoons. Yet these silent steel cathedrals are not merely technological relics of a bygone era of big-gun diplomacy. They are the final, undisturbed resting places of tens of thousands of young men who burned, suffocated, or drowned within their armored vitals. To explore their quiet, rusting superstructures is to confront a sobering paradox: the contrast between the seemingly indestructible, brutal scale of human engineering and the fragile, ephemeral lives caught inside their flaming corridors. Across the globe, 7 specific battleship wrecks stand above all others, monuments of unprecedented steel that still rest on the ocean floor today, each preserving a gripping story of hubris, sacrifice, and the relentless passage of historical time. The first of these sacred underwater sanctuaries rests in the warm, shallow waters of Oahu, Hawaii, where the metallic scent of heavy fuel oil still gently breaks the surface of the Pacific, 85 years after the catastrophe unfolded. This is the wreck of the Pennsylvania-class super dreadnought, the USS Arizona. Commissioned during the height of the First World War and modernized with heavy tripod masts and improved anti-aircraft defenses in the interwar years, the Arizona was a symbol of American naval power in the Pacific. Displacing over 31,000 tons, stretching 608 feet in length, and armed with 12 14-inch main guns housed in 4 triple turrets, she was considered an impenetrable fortress when anchored at Battleship Row on the morning of December 7, 1941. Inside her hull that morning was a crew of 1,514 men, many of them preparing for Sunday morning colors or writing letters home. Among them was Rear Admiral Isaac Campbell Kidd, the commander of Battleship Division 1, alongside the ship's commanding officer, Captain Franklin van Valkenburg. At 8:06 a.m., as the second wave of Japanese Nakajima B-5N2 high-altitude bombers roared over Ford Island, a modified 16-inch armor-piercing naval shell, fitted with fins and converted into an 800-kilogram bomb, was dropped from an altitude of 10,000 feet. The bomb struck the Arizona's starboard deck near Turret 2, slicing through 3 steel decks before penetrating the forward black powder magazine. The resulting detonation was one of the most violent non-nuclear explosions in human history. Over 180,000 pounds of smokeless powder ignited in a fraction of a second. A catastrophic fireball tore through the forward half of the ship, lifting the 31-ton forward turrets out of their barbettes, blowing out the hull plating and collapsing the forward superstructure downward into the flaming vortex. 1,177 men were killed almost instantaneously, including Admiral Kidd and Captain van Valkenburg, whose physical remains were never recovered, leaving behind only Kidd's Annapolis Naval Academy ring, fused to the charred steel of the nav bridge. Today, the Arizona lies in just 40 feet of water, her rusted barbettes and shattered hull covered in colorful sea anemones and coral. Unlike many deep ocean wrecks, she remains directly connected to the living world. The USS Arizona Memorial spans her sunken midships, allowing millions of visitors to look down through the green water at her exposed deck plates. For decades, a slow, continuous trickle of heavy bunker C fuel oil, affectionately referred to by survivors as the tears of the Arizona, has seeped out from her ruptured fuel tanks, rising to the surface at a rate of roughly 2 to 9 quarts per day. Scientists estimate that her internal tanks still hold over 500,000 gallons of fuel, a quiet, black bleeding that serves as a visceral daily reminder of the 1,100 sailors who still rest inside her steel tomb. If the Arizona is a shallow sanctuary of memory, the second legendary wreck lies at the absolute opposite extreme, isolated in the pitch-black, ice-cold depths of the North Atlantic, nearly 15,700 feet below the storm-tossed surface. This is the final resting place of the most feared warship of the Third Reich, the Bismarck. Laid down in Hamburg at the Blohm und Voss shipyard in July 1936, the Bismarck was a terrifying masterpiece of military engineering. Displacing over 50,000 tons fully loaded, she measured 823 feet long and was protected by a thick armor belt of Krupp cemented steel. Her primary armament consisted of 8 15-inch Sek/C/34 guns, capable of hurling an 1,800-pound shell over 22 miles with devastating precision. The story of her brief 5-day combat career in May 1941 is etched into naval legend. After destroying the British battlecruiser HMS Hood in the Denmark Strait, the Bismarck was hunted relentlessly by the Royal Navy. Crippled by a single, lucky aerial torpedo strike from a Swordfish biplane launched from HMS Ark Royal, which jammed her twin rudders 12 degrees to port, the giant warship was left circling helplessly into the path of the approaching British home fleet. On the morning of May 27, 1941, the battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney surrounded the wounded Leviathan, pumping over 2,000 heavy shells into her superstructure over 2 grueling hours. Despite being pounded into a flaming, distorted pile of scrap steel, the Bismarck's heavy armor deck held firm, refusing to let her hull shatter completely. The ship's commander, Admiral Günther Lütjens, and her captain, Ernst Lindemann, perished alongside over 2,000 German crewmen as the executive officer, Commander Hans Oels, issued the final order to open the scuttling valves and detonate demo charges in the engine rooms to prevent her capture. At 10:39 a.m., the Bismarck rolled over to port and slid beneath the freezing Atlantic waves. For nearly half a century, the Bismarck was lost to the world until June 1989, when Dr. Robert Ballard, using advanced deep-sea towed sonar and the submersibles Seacliff and Alvin, located her wreckage resting on the flank of an extinct underwater volcano. What Ballard found shocked the maritime world. As the Bismarck sank, her hull slid 2 miles down the underwater mountain, triggering an enormous undersea avalanche that carved a deep furrow in the sediment before coming to a rest in an upright position. Because her armor held and her hull was opened by scuttling charges rather than catastrophic internal magazine explosions, the Bismarck lies remarkably intact. Her wood teak decking is preserved in the oxygen-deprived abyssal cold. Her massive swastika deck markings are still visible beneath a thin layer of silt, and her 4 main gun turrets, which fell out as she inverted during her plunge, lie scattered nearby in a vast debris field. The wreck sits in total, pristine silence, completely immune to light, wave action, or industrial disturbance, a massive gray tomb resting 3 miles deep, forever guarded by the crushing pressure of the North Atlantic. Stepping into the tropical waters of the South China Sea, near the coast of Kuantan, Malaysia, we find the third famous battleship wreck, lying upside down in just 220 feet of water. This is HMS Prince of Wales, a King George V class battleship that held a pivotal, tragic place in the evolution of 20th century naval warfare. Commissioned in early 1941, the Prince of Wales was a technological marvel, featuring a sophisticated belt of face-hardened cement armor, submerged torpedo defense bulkheads, and 10 14-inch guns mounted in an unconventional arrangement of 1 twin and 2 massive quadruple turrets. The Prince of Wales was a veteran of the hunt for the Bismarck, during which she carried Prime Minister Winston Churchill across the Atlantic to sign the Atlantic Charter with President Franklin D. Roosevelt in Placentia Bay. But in late 1941, as tension mounted in the Pacific, Churchill dispatched the Prince of Wales, under the command of Admiral Sir Tom Phillips and Captain John Leach, to Singapore as the flagship of Force Z, a high-profile naval detachment meant to deter Japanese aggression in Southeast Asia. That deterrence evaporated on the morning of December 10, 1941, just 3 days after Pearl Harbor. Sailing without air cover in the open waters of the South China Sea, Force Z was intercepted by 85 land-based Mitsubishi G-3M and G-4M bombers of the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. In a coordinated, relentless air attack that altered the trajectory of naval warfare forever, Japanese torpedo bombers skimmed low over the water, dropping aerial torpedoes directly into the path of the maneuvering battleship. The fatal blow came early in the engagement. A single 18-inch torpedo struck the Prince of Wales's port quarter, right at the point where the outer propeller shaft exited the armored hull. The immense shockwave tore open the shaft alley, buckling internal bulkheads and causing the long propeller shaft to distort violently, while still spinning at hundreds of revolutions per minute. The flailing shaft tore up the internal machinery spaces, opening a massive conduit for thousands of tons of seawater to rush directly into the ship's power distribution center. Losing electric power, her steering failed, her automated 5.25-inch dual-purpose anti-aircraft guns were rendered useless, and her pumping systems collapsed. A series of subsequent bomb and torpedo hits sealed her fate. At 1:18 p.m., the Prince of Wales rolled over to port and sank, taking 842 men of Force Z to the bottom alongside her consort, the battlecruiser HMS Repulse. The destruction of Force Z marked the exact historical moment when the era of the battleship came to an end, yielding total dominance of the seas to carrier-borne aviation. Today, the wreck of the Prince of Wales rests completely inverted in shallow tropical waters. Because she lies within depth ranges accessible to mixed-gas technical divers, her story in recent decades has taken a dark, distressing turn. In recent years, maritime historians and the British Royal Navy have discovered that the Prince of Wales, despite being a protected war grave containing the remains of hundreds of British sailors, has been targeted by illegal scrap metal salvagers. Using heavy crane barges equipped with massive iron grabbers, illegal operations have blasted her hull with explosives to tear away her high-value phosphor bronze propellers, copper piping, and heavy armor plating. The desecration of the Prince of Wales stands as a tragic testament to the ongoing struggle to protect sacred underwater war graves from international industrial piracy. In the remote tropical waters of the Philippine archipelago, hidden deep within the quiet, island-studded Sibuyan Sea, lies the fourth giant of the deep, the Imperial Japanese Navy battleship Musashi. Along with her famous sister ship Yamato, the Musashi was the largest, most heavily armed battleship ever constructed in human history. Built in absolute secrecy at the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki, she displaced a staggering 72,800 tons, fully loaded, stretched 862 feet in length, and was protected by a thick armor belt angled inward to defeat the heaviest enemy shells. Her main battery consisted of 9 massive 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval artillery ever mounted on a warship, capable of firing a 3,200-pound armor-piercing shell over 26 miles. In October 1944, as the American fleet launched the invasion of Leyte Island, the Musashi sailed as part of Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, intended to smash the vulnerable American landing transports. But on October 24, 1944, as Kurita's fleet entered the narrow waters of the Sibuyan Sea, they were intercepted by hundreds of carrier aircraft from the United States Navy's Third Fleet. For over 9 hours, the Musashi was subjected to an incredible, unprecedented wave of aerial bombardment. Recognizing the immense anti-aircraft fire coming from her decks, American pilot squadrons focused their attacks with surgical precision. Over the course of 5 distinct airstrikes, the Musashi was struck by an estimated 19 torpedoes and 17 heavy armor-piercing bombs. Under the command of Captain Toshihira Inoguchi, the crew fought frantically to counter-flood internal compartments as thousands of tons of water rushed into her bow, forcing her lower and lower into the sea until her stem was completely submerged. Despite her massive armor plating and complex honeycomb of watertight bulkheads, the sheer volume of high explosive energy overwhelmed her structural integrity. At 7:36 p.m., as the sun set over the Sibuyan Sea, Captain Inoguchi retired to his cabin to go down with his ship, leaving behind a written apology to his superiors for the loss of the vessel. The Musashi rolled heavily to port and sank bow first, taking over 1,000 of her 2,300 crewmen into the dark depths of 3,200 feet. For over 70 years, the exact location of the Musashi remained one of the great lost mysteries of the Pacific War, wrapped in local rumors and conflicting survivor accounts. It was not until March 2015 that the late Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist Paul Allen, operating from his advanced research vessel MYY Octopus, located the wreck using autonomous underwater vehicles and multi-beam sonar. The ROV images revealed a scene of violent, monumental destruction. As the Musashi sank into the abyss, her internal magazines exploded in a vast underwater detonation that shattered her massive structure into multiple pieces. The main bow section, featuring the iconic chrysanthemum seal of the Imperial Japanese Navy, sits upright on the muddy seafloor, while her main turrets, bridge structures, and stern section lie scattered across a massive debris field stretching thousands of yards. The discovery brought long-awaited closure to the families of her crew, transforming a mysterious war shadow into a recognized, sacred war grave beneath the tropical waves of the Philippines. Less than 6 months after the destruction of the Musashi, her direct sister ship met an equally apocalyptic fate in the waters of the East China Sea. This was the IJN Yamato, the lead ship of her class and the ultimate flagship of the Imperial Japanese Navy. By April 1945, the war had reached the doorstep of the Japanese mainland, with American forces invading the island of Okinawa. In a desperate, final suicidal gesture known as Operation Tengo, the Japanese High Command ordered the Yamato, under the command of Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito and Captain Kosaku Aruga, to embark on a one-way mission. The Yamato was loaded with only enough fuel to reach Okinawa, where she was ordered to beach herself on the coral reefs, transform her massive hull into an unmovable coastal artillery battery, and fight until her last shell was expended. The crew knew it was a death sentence. Before departing the Tokuyama fuel depot on April 6th, young officers and sailors sang traditional war songs, drank farewell toasts of sake, and wrote final letters home to their mothers and wives. On the afternoon of April 7, 1945, as the Yamato moved south through the East China Sea without any air cover, she was spotted by American reconnaissance planes. Within minutes, over 380 aircraft from Task Force 58 descended upon the lonely warship. American dive bombers and torpedo planes coordinated their strikes, hitting the Yamato almost exclusively on her port side to ensure rapid capsizing. For 2 hours, the giant ship endured 10 torpedo hits and 13 direct heavy bomb strikes. Water flooded her engine rooms, her steering gear jammed, and her list grew unmanageable. Vice Admiral Ito ordered the operation canceled and tied himself to the bridge railings to go down with the ship. At 2:23 p.m., as the Yamato rolled completely upside down, the high-explosive main ammunition in her aft 18-inch magazine ignited. The resulting explosion produced a massive mushroom cloud that rose over 4 miles into the sky, visible from the southern coast of mainland Japan over 100 miles away. The blast was so violent that it blew the 800-foot ship into 2 distinct shattered pieces and killed over 3,000 Japanese sailors, making it the single deadliest naval action involving a single warship in history. Today, the wreck of the Yamato rests 1,100 feet down in the East China Sea, roughly 200 miles southwest of Kyushu. Discovered by a Japanese deep-sea expedition in 1985 and explored extensively in subsequent decades, the Yamato lies in a state of horrific disarray. Her forward section, stretching roughly 300 feet long, lies on its starboard side, while her massive stern section lies upside down several hundred meters away. Her 18-inch main turrets, weighing nearly 3,000 tons each, fell free during the capsizing and lie upside down in the mud. Scattered across the seafloor around her shattered hull are thousands of 18-inch shells, anti-aircraft barrels, personal belongings, and small brass fixtures. The Yamato wreck serves as a tragic physical symbol of the utter destruction of the Japanese imperial dream, a monument of incomprehensible scale, sitting in absolute cold darkness. Returning to the northern hemisphere, tucked into the dark, freezing waters of the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland, lies the tragic wreck of the capital ship that was once the pride of the entire British Empire, HMS Hood. Launched in 1918 and commissioned in 1920, the Hood was officially classified as a battlecruiser, but her massive displacement of 42,000 tons, her 8 15-inch guns, and her long, elegant hull made her the functional equivalent of a fast battleship. For 2 decades, the mighty Hood toured the globe as a symbol of Royal Navy supremacy, visited by millions of admirers in ports from Sydney to Rio de Janeiro. However, her design belonged to a bygone era. Her deck armor was relatively thin compared to modern fast battleships, making her vulnerable to long-range plunging shell fire. On May 24, 1941, during the Battle of the Denmark Strait, HMS Hood and the newly commissioned HMS Prince of Wales intercepted the German battleship Bismarck and her escorting heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. At 5:52 a.m., at a range of roughly 13 miles, the ships opened fire. Under the command of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland and Captain Ralph Kerr, the Hood closed the distance rapidly, to bring her flatter shell trajectory into play. But at 6 a.m., as the hood was turning to bring her aft turrets to bear, a 15-inch armor-piercing shell from the Bismarck's fifth salvo struck the hood near her mainmast. The shell penetrated deep into the hull, entering the aft 4-inch or 15-inch magazine. A sudden, terrifying pillar of flame erupted from the hood's main deck near the mainmast, followed by a silent, catastrophic internal explosion that tore the battlecruiser in half. The stern collapsed inward, while the forward half rose vertically out of the water like a giant steel needle, before sinking in less than 3 minutes. Out of 1,418 officers and men on board, only 3 survived: Midshipman Keith Dunkley, Ordinary Seaman Ted Briggs, and Able Seaman Bob Tilburn. They were pulled from the freezing water hours later by the destroyer HMS Electra, leaving behind a tragedy that sent shockwaves across the entire British Commonwealth. In July 2001, a deep-sea expedition led by shipwreck hunter David Mearns located the wreck of HMS Hood, resting 9,300 feet below the surface of the Denmark Strait. The wreck reflects the extreme violence of her final seconds. The Hood was completely dismembered by her magazine explosion. Her hull rests in several main debris sections spread across the abyssal floor. Her bow section lies on its port side, completely severed from the rest of the ship, while her stern section lies inverted in the mud. The central midships area was reduced to an extensive field of shredded steel plates, boiler tubes, and twisted framing. In 2015, an expedition sponsored by Paul Allen successfully recovered the Hood's main ship's bell from the debris field. Restored and now displayed at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth, the bell serves as a tangible, poignant bridge between the abyss and the living, honoring the 1,400 men who died in 3 terrifying minutes in 1941. The 7th and final famous underwater battleship wreck rests in a far more exotic, highly surreal environment, the clear, warm lagoon of Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, where a former flagship lies as a silent witness to the dawn of the nuclear age. This is the Imperial Japanese Navy battleship Nagato. Commissioned in 1920 as the lead ship of her class, the Nagato was the first super dreadnought in the world to mount 16-inch, 410mm guns. Displacing over 39,000 tons after extensive interwar modernizations, she possessed a distinctive, iconic pagoda-mast superstructure that became synonymous with Japanese capital ship design. The Nagato holds a central, dark place in 20th century history. It was from her Admiral's Bridge, anchored at Hiroshima Bay on December 2, 1941, that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto issued the famous coded order to the Japanese strike force, Nitaka Yama Nobore, climb Mount Nitaka, giving the final authorization to launch the attack on Pearl Harbor. Unlike Yamato, Musashi, or Bismarck, the Nagato survived the entire Pacific War, emerging in August 1945 as the only Japanese battleship still afloat, albeit heavily damaged and stripped of her fuel. Following the surrender of Japan, the United States Navy seized the Nagato as a prize of war. In 1946, she was selected to be part of a target fleet of 95 surplus and captured vessels assembled at Bikini Atoll for Operation Crossroads, a series of atmospheric and underwater nuclear bomb tests designed to measure the destructive effects of atomic weapons on heavy warship hulls. In July 1946, the Nagato was anchored in the calm lagoon of Bikini Atoll. On July 1st, the Able test, an aerial nuclear detonation, exploded over the lagoon, causing moderate superstructure damage to the battleship. But it was the second test, the infamous Baker test on July 25, 1946, that sealed her fate. An underwater nuclear detonation suspended 20 meters below a landing craft produced a massive radioactive water column that rose thousands of feet into the sky. The shockwave from the Baker blast squeezed the Nagato's underwater hull, buckled her plating, and forced open her sea valves. Radioactive water washed over her decks. Slowly, quietly, over the next 4 days, the contaminated warship began to list heavily to starboard. On the night of July 29, 1946, without a single human soul on board, the Nagato quietly capsized and sank beneath the surface of the lagoon. Today, the Nagato rests upside down in 170 feet of warm, clear water. Because the radioactive isotopes from Operation Crossroads have decayed significantly over the decades, the wreck of the Nagato has become one of the most famous, awe-inspiring sights in the world for advanced technical scuba divers. Lying inverted on the sandy floor of the lagoon, her massive 16-inch main gun turrets rest half-buried in the sand, her 4 giant propellers face the surface, and her massive towering pagoda bridge structure stretches out horizontally into the clear blue water. Divers can swim directly into the bridge space where Yamato issued the order for Pearl Harbor, floating past light fixtures, copper telegraphs, and heavy steel bulkheads now encrusted in vibrant soft corals and swarming with tropical fish. The Nagato presents a stunning visual contrast, a ship constructed to project global military power, shattered by the absolute power of the atomic bomb, now transformed into a quiet, living artificial reef. As we look across these 7 sunken steel giants, from the shallow, oil-bleeding hull of the Arizona in Pearl Harbor to the deep, freezing tomb of the Bismarck in the Atlantic, from the looted plates of the Prince of Wales to the shattered remains of the Musashi and Yamato, from the violently severed hull of the Hood to the nuclear-blasted frame of the Nagato, we are confronted with a haunting, universal truth. These vessels were the absolute peak of human industrial ambition, built at astronomical financial and human expense to assert national dominance over the seas. Yet, within the span of a few brief, violent hours, every single one of them was reduced to a quiet, rusting relic on the ocean floor, dragged down by the very steel armor designed to save them. Today, they rest in absolute silence, removed from the geopolitical hatreds that brought them into existence, serving as quiet sanctuaries for marine life and sacred war graves for thousands of young sailors who never came home. They force us to confront a lingering, deeply philosophical question about human nature, historical memory, and our collective future. As the physical remains of these giant warships slowly collapse into the silt and vanish over the coming centuries, will we remember them merely as monumental feats of engineering and military power, or will we finally learn the sobering lesson written in their rusted steel, that the ultimate tragedy of human civilization is our willingness to pour our greatest genius, resources, and human lives into weapons designed only to destroy?